Welcome to iBest English Centre, free online IELTS lessons. Today we're going to look at diagrams for writing Task 1. Writing Task 1 requires you to write a report. You should spend no longer than 20 minutes on this. You will have to write 150 words or more. Don't forget, the examiner will be counting the number of words you write in your report, so make sure you don't write under 150 words. So, what do we need to do if we've got diagrams for Task 1? Let's take a look. So, how do we begin studying diagrams? Well, one of the most important things to begin with is to analyse your diagram. The two key points that you need to think about are stages and organisation. So there are two questions to ask. How many stages are there? And how many paragraphs will you have in your report? Look at the diagram on the page and decide the answers that you have for these questions. If we look at the stages, we can clearly see that there are 7 stages in this diagram which shows the life cycle of a frog. We can see that it starts with eggs, then embryo, tadpole, front legs break through, start of pulmonary breathing, tadpole frog, and then adult frog. We also need to think about the organisation of the report. How will you divide these stages into paragraphs? Well, in your report you need to have an introduction. For diagrams, the introduction does not need to be very long. You also need to have an overall statement. This is an overview. It's often best to put both of these into one paragraph at the beginning of your report. Then we come to the body of the report. You will need to divide the body of the report into paragraphs, normally 2 or 3 paragraphs. We can see here that one of the best ways to divide this is to have eggs, embryo, tadpole, front legs break through in one paragraph. Then, in another paragraph, we can have the other stages: start of pulmonary breathing, tadpole frog, and adult frog. In Task 1 writing, you do not need to have a conclusion, but you do need to have the overall statement. So let's look at the introduction. What should we put in an introduction for a report of a diagram? Well, the introduction needs to be simple and factual. You do not need a thesis statement, you do not need a background statement. That is for Task 2. For Task 1, we just need factual information about the diagram. Here is an introduction for you. The diagram illustrates the stages in the life cycle of a frog. You can see that we start with the diagram. We don't need to alter these words. After that, we have a verb, illustrates. You could also use gives information about or shows. After that, you need to explain what the diagram is. And in this case, it is the stages in the life cycle of a frog. You can see that the life cycle of a frog has not been paraphrased. Not all phrases and words can be paraphrased in English. So in this case, it is repeated. But for other diagrams, if you have a chance, you should be paraphrasing. Let's look at the overview. This needs to contain the main stages. For students who are aiming for a band score 6 and above, the overview needs to be clear and easy to find. If you look at the public band score descriptors published by IELTS, you will see the examiner is looking for this. Here is an overview for this diagram. Overall, eggs hatch into embryos, which later develop into tadpoles and then adult frogs. You can see that not all the stages have been mentioned. Only the key stages have been chosen to put into the overall statement. Now let's look at linkers. To get a band score 6 or above, you need to show the examiner a range of linkers. You've got to remember that each type of Task 1 has different linkers, so you need to know which linkers to use for which task. Already we have seen that the overall statement begins with a linker. We use the linker overall. This helps the examiner find the overall statement quicker. Other linkers for diagrams are in the beginning, next, in the following stage, after that, finally. Some more linkers: as a result, in order to, so as to. Remember, to use linkers well, you do need to see how they're used grammatically. They must be spelt correctly and used grammatically correctly. Looking at grammar, if you're aiming for a band score 6 or above, you need to show the examiner a range of grammar tenses. For diagrams, you'll need to use a mixture of the passive voice and present simple. Here's an example of the passive voice. In the beginning, eggs are laid in a pond. Are laid is the passive voice. You'll also need to use the present simple. Here is an example. The tadpole develops front legs. You have to pay attention with the present simple, particularly with the third person singular. You need to add an extra S onto the end of your verb. The tadpole develops front legs. The examiner knows that many students are weak in this area and will be checking for that. Another aspect of Task 1 which you need to think about is collocations. To get a band score 7 or above, you will need to show an understanding of collocations. This means you need to show that you understand which words go together, for example, which nouns match which verbs. Here is an example. In the diagram, we have the noun embryo. Which verb should we use for this? Here is the answer. Embryos develop into tadpoles. Another thing to look at is paraphrasing. To get a band score 7 or above, you will need to be able to paraphrase well. In the diagram, the word eggs is written. This can be paraphrased. For our student aiming for a high band score, they will need to know the word frog spawn. Let's review how to get a better band score for diagrams in IELTS Writing Task 1. Firstly, write a factual introduction. Keep it short and simple. Attach an overall statement to it. Secondly, start your overview with the linker overall. This will make it easier for the examiner to find. Thirdly, keep your paragraphing clear and easy to see. One way to do this is to leave an empty line between each paragraph. Next, be careful with your spelling. This is particularly important when you're using vocabulary from the diagram. Many students, when they transfer a word from the diagram to their report, don't check the spelling. This can reduce your band score. And don't forget, always check your articles. The, un. Which one do you need to use? Or possibly no article at all. And lastly, always use complex grammar structures. This is particularly important for students aiming for band score 6 and above. And don't forget to use a mix of the present simple and the passive voice. Before we finish this lesson, there is something you need to remember. IELTS is a language test. It is not a memory test. Learning an academic style of writing does not mean memorizing phrases or sentences. Memorized language is not accepted by IELTS, so make sure you study with a teacher or at a centre that can help you understand this. We hope you enjoyed this short lesson on IELTS Writing Task 1 for diagrams. To learn more about IELTS, please call us. This is brought to you by iBest English Centre, a centre that focuses on IELTS, English and TOEIC.